but I'm hoping that you'll start by giving us a little bit of an overview of your talk today. So why don't you go ahead and start with that?
Well, I sure will. So I have this client I've been working with for about 10 months now, and the eh, we're redoing their communities. They have some over the years. I'm talking about in a period of at least 15 years, some pretty robust discussion and problem solving activity. But their sense was, and I give them a lot of credit for this, is that they could take it to another level. And one of the things their communities were really based on an effective discussion area where they went back and forth. But their sense was they were, like I mentioned earlier, recreating the wheel, and there was an opportunity to get more specific, to be more precise, build better processes. I always refer to processes as the flows of knowledge within the organization. A lot of major challenges for them in terms of barriers and cultural barriers, linguistic barriers, people speaking English, which is mandated by this organization as a second, third, fourth, or fifth language. It can be very, very challenging for large global organizations, particularly when you're talking about technical issues and solving problems for customers, et cetera. So that's what I've been working with them on, is this opportunity to transform their communities to make them even better and more business focused. So today, I'll start with shift over to this slide. One of the things that was very, very helpful for us and is the fact that they had so much activity that was going on. So when we did this text analysis to create a taxonomy, and ultimately, by the way, this is creating a taxonomy for me, I always look beyond that because I'm thinking taxonomy in the context of expertise or people that are true experts and fleshing out those kind of categories. So I look at taxonomy as the creation of capabilities and competencies for an organization. So ultimately, that's where I want to push beyond, because connecting people is around behavior. So knowing what people know about is critically important. In the case of this organization, they had so much discussion activity that was so significant. And what I did was I grabbed about 4 years of the data, and I was able to do the text analysis. Now, the first step in text analysis is you got to have some good quality text to be able to go after. So I put my arms around this as something, and it's so valid because people are going back and forth and solving problems for the organization. So it started with this massive amount of data that I collected across more than one communities to be able to do the analysis and create their taxonomy. So in broad brushstrokes, I always have thought of building a taxonomy in this triangular metaphor, which is where you can gather information and do text analysis at the bottom, where you have a broad amount of content that can help then later on in step two, where you're corroborating the results of what you found with individuals. So it's through conversations that you can optimize and sharpen the taxonomy, topics and subtopics, a 2-level taxonomy in this case, and then push those over into something that's comfortable in terms of areas of expertise, competencies, and capabilities of individuals. So, and you know, when you build a taxonomy, and particularly when it's reflective of expertise, you're never really done. So put the governance in place also to be able to make sure that the processes for improving that are very, very agile. And because you want to allow individuals to be able to make suggestions, et cetera. So it's kind of the metaphor that I like to use, and that's what the human expert refinement is so important once you get a set of topics and subtopics. In the case of this particular organization, there was just so much information. I mean, a word cloud is on the right, and just a little bit of eye candy, if you will. It's not really going to be something that you're going to utilize to be able to make decisions. But it's an indicator, and what you're looking at here is an opportunity to take this fabulous content that we had, and to be able to start to determine what are the keywords, what are the similarities, what are the clusters of words that are happening, et cetera. In the case of this client, I use an open source text analysis tool called Orange, like the fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, really powerful. It can be a little bit tricky, but it's open source developed, which I particularly like that facet of it. And
Mhm.
so this is an example of where I'm starting to look at the clusters and to flesh out what the topics and subtopics are going to be. And I actually have some screenshots from this Orange software, which is actually, I just used the free version of it for this client. And these are the steps that I took in using a text analysis to build their initial starter taxonomy. You can see the steps 1 through 8 right there.
Mhm.
And the first thing I did was I literally took the discussion activity, the questions and replies, the people that made that, and I created a CSV file,
Uh-huh.
and then I put that as the corpus right into the software to be able to start the processing approach. Um, the next step in preparing the data, I just mentioned this, the CSV file is really important. There's some other little idiosyncratic things. This software comes, and of course in YouTube, you can find a lot of videos. So I use a few videos to be able to sharpen my skills with this, the software and how it was implemented. There were a few idiosyncratic things that I had to just understand to be able to make it work
Okay.
more effectively. So I worked through this, and you just load the corpus and you of data. And again, the quality was so good that I knew that I was going to get some good results. And I did a little bit of pre-processing. It's one of the steps in the software. It's called pre-processing the text, and to get it ready, to get it more consumable, so to speak, by the Orange text analysis software. And I just did some visualizations here, and this is
Mhm.
again the word cloud. It's not again the results that are going to really be able to drive you in the direction that ultimately we went in. But I just wanted to visualize and pre-process to get a sense for whether or not the terms that I would expect based on what I know about this particular community and the scope of this community, if it was working in an effective direction. So the next step 5, representing the corpus with numerical values. This is where you start to really leverage the power of this text analysis tool to be able to do some further analysis. And literally, they have this. You throw this into the bag of words, because what we're talking about is that at this point, it's just kind of a bag of words, and there's a little bit of randomness associated with it, and you're trying to be able to figure out, what are the words and what are the clusters of the words, et cetera. And one of the things I like to do is use the cosine functionality to be able to compute the distances between keywords, because it's the distances a lot of times that can give you the tendencies in the data that you're looking at to say, this word appears right next to this other word so many times that there must be something to this, in terms of what it is that the problems they're solving,
Right.
the services they're providing for customers, et cetera. So you want to be able to do that and then push that further into a more specific clustering. And
Right.
for the clustering, the thing that I looked at, and this is really cool because of the software, it allows you to not just do the hierarchical clustering, but to start to identify some of the combinations of words. The software calls it, which is common in text analysis, bigrams and trigrams. A
Mhm.
bigram is a combination of words. How often do those two words appear together? And a trigram is 3 words together. How often do they appear together? And it really points you in the direction of being able to start to make some key assumptions in terms of what the taxonomy, the clustering, the topics, and then the children underneath those topics, the subtopics are going to be. And this is just a quick look at in this case, the bigrams, to show how many, and then the software automatically provides you with a score to be able to numerically determine, what are the more frequent bigrams and what are the more frequent trigrams. And this is really important in order to be able to create the topics and subtopics, and to be able to flesh out, getting yourself ready for those human interactions and talking to true experts to be able to corroborate whether or not the starter taxonomy generated by the software is indeed valid or needs to be changed. And that's that next step in here. So that's kind of I call that utilizing the tool or constructing the taxonomy. And then if I go over and take a look here to give you some kind of more specific ideas, one of the cool things that I did was is that I was looking at the results of the text analysis, not just through the eyes of creating the starter taxonomy, but also fleshing out the key problems that come up time and time again. So you're looking at a lot of times with, people call them KPIs, key performance indicators. You're looking to be able to determine, where it hurts the most, that kind of root cause analysis kind of, and I'm using the machine to help me do this to see what keeps coming up time and time again, because there's got to be something to that. So for me, in this case, that when the data is good, it's good quality data, it's real people going back and forth. What you're going to find is, you find that you'll be able to start to extract some tendencies, like the number of technical errors that are happening, the number of resolved issues, the different types of errors, like a timeout error was something, or calibration errors. They were prominent in the text that I was analyzing. And in this case, I was analyzing over 1.6 million total words that were pushed around over a 4-year period of time. So there was the substance is reflective of these kind of results that you can have. So for communities that you should push, because a community should have things, and I like to use a balanced scorecard. So in the upper left-hand quadrant, you might have things like, we want to increase the number of questions, increase the number of replies, broaden the number of people that are participating, in this community, et cetera. But for me, it's the KPIs or the business metrics in the upper right-hand quadrant that are most important. So you want to be able to, like, one of the things in the upper left-hand quadrant for this particular company is to make sure there's a reply to every question within 24 hours. That's important. But I want to know how you're handling where it hurts the most, and whether or not you're taking advantage of turning that, for example, into from tacit knowledge into explicit. From a learning perspective, can you make those short learning courses? Can you make it into a knowledge article? So when these things come up time and time again, and this is, when it comes to retaining critical knowledge, my belief and what I've learned on the job is that the only way you can really do effective knowledge retention is to have it built into the processes you're building within a community or knowledge management overall for an organization. So it's a very, very important opportunity. So the bigrams, trigrams, and these kind of issues that come up were really, really important. I looked deeply into each of these, and I was able to, the conversations I was able to have with senior management at the organization were, I would call them revelational. So when I'm looking at, increasing productivity and timeout errors and things like that, and the tendencies and the prominent things that were coming up, another one was the number of resolved issues, like I mentioned. I was actually showing the data to be able to say that, hey, this should be a key metric for this particular community. And I was able to say that, this came up 323 times in the almost 1,900 discussion items that I was analyzing. So it's not just, whimsical. It's something that keeps coming up time and time again, and you want to be able to identify those. In this case, I mentioned calibration issues, which was a big deal for them, 428 times out of the almost 1,900 discussion items. So, those kind of tendencies should drive you again toward the metrics to be able to create a little bit more value. And I showed them their bigrams and trigrams. I went into great detail on this because those really are indicative of key areas where they want to make sure that those come through, because the only reason that words appear together from a business standpoint, in my opinion, are because they're being discussed and they're really, really important. So bigrams and then the trigrams also, to be able to show them, hey, these are, key focus areas. And now you're starting to really get a palpable feel for concrete topics and subtopics that should flow into the starter taxonomy. So this is a case of trigrams. There's a reason why words come up that are that many times. And the scores aren't the times of, it's a relative score on the y-axis there that the actual orange software provides. And so when it showed up in this analysis, all of these are really, really important because people were squeezing these words together, et cetera, throughout. So what questions do you have on that?
Can you go back to the beginning of that presentation? I think it's the second slide.
Mhm.
I think it's that one.
This
The
one?
third slide, sorry.
Mhm.
Yeah, so when we look at these categories, like the number of technical errors, number of resolved issues, the taxonomy terms are based on a combination of term frequency and proximity to each other. Is that right?
That's right. And also, but then I lean into, human instincts and what they know in terms of the
Right.
scope of the community and what they're pushing around and what's important for supporting their customers around the world. So it's that combination of the science, and this is more of the science because when you analyze this amount of very, very valid words, then the science is there. But the science is not all. It's a balance between the science and the art comes on the human side.
It's the quantitative with the qualitative.
Exactly.
So the categories here, the technical errors, resolved issues, timeout error, calibration issues. How did you determine those categories?
I determined based on frequency and the proximity of the words one to another. And then
Okay.
I corroborated them with experts. So because the experts have been in the game, they're in the trenches, and I don't, it's, it's too much of a leap of faith, even though I said that scientifically I can show where these words appear time and time again and appear next to each other. It's still, you have to go through the process. If you don't have deep expertise, which I don't, in the area in which they work, I want to corroborate this with people before I go to market with something and say definitively, these are potential metrics for you.
So those are the clusters then, is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
And so the terms like map error, tolerance error, runtime error, those are the taxonomy terms itself. Is that right?
They can very well be the topics and subtopic areas. In many cases, they were. So when I pop over there, it's timely that I kind of go in. And so when I start creating
Mhm.
um, a, a taxonomy, this is just a simple spreadsheet that I like to use, and
Mhm.
it goes through and these are I'm fleshing out here the topics and the subtopics here. So many of those
Nice.
words here in this first version of this were here, and then the things that I really focus on are these questions too, because it was clear to me that these are key business related questions that people need to be asking. And then the KPI areas were these areas. And this is where you can start to say, wow, if we did, based on what's happening, if we were solving these more readily, or again, I mentioned if we were turning tacit knowledge into explicit things written down, knowledge articles that you could find. Maybe I love wiki articles for this because it's a fluid, dynamic environment where when I'm asking a question, say, imagine a scenario where things are popping up. Everyone's talking about chat GPT these days,
Right.
but just imagine that, it would be fabulous where, you can and it's so good that you're really just being able to kind of self-solve the problems without being able to, less efficiently, I'm going to call it, even though there's really from a collaboration standpoint, I called it earlier collective elaboration, that learning opportunity for people around the world, because so much learning happens on the job to see how things, you know, um, solve themselves or how people help each other and build on each other's ideas. But you don't want the same question being asked that got asked 5 months ago.
Right.
And you don't
Right.
want the same kind of errors coming up time and time again. And it's a brilliant thing that they're solving it, and they're solving it around the world, across their different locations. All knowledge, most knowledge is local. And so they're pulling out local best practices and they're having that happen in real time and all that. But um, ideally, you want to work toward having these things identified and solved overall over time so that you can find the knowledge where it's already been solved. So you don't even have to ask a question.
That leads me to another question that came up in my head earlier, which is, so do you then have some sort of built-in iterative process that can update the topics and the subtopics as you go or as they go through the use of this tool?
Absolutely. So in the community, it's when you're getting ready to ask a question, for example,
Mhm.
we have and this is, sometimes I joke about it. I say that, this is a serious organization, like most companies and organizations are. I'm not saying there aren't, but they're not, we're not going to let people kind of hashtag their way to heaven, because we don't want people just to introduce new topics and subtopics. It has to go through an approval process. But when you're asking a question literally, and you're tagging the question on what it's about, what's cool about our communities is that when we've got so many people that have now nominated their expertise in the communities based on the taxonomy created, and the taxonomy created is based on the questions and answers and other key knowledge that they have in the organization. So we know the taxonomy is good and it's been corroborated by human beings. So what's happening there is that in the process of asking a question, when I tag that question, everyone doesn't get an immediate alert. Only people with matching expertise, or people who are experts, which is a more sanctioned higher level. Having expertise is one thing. It's very different than being a sanctioned an approved expert per criteria that the organization decides upon. But having that precisely move to those people immediately. So Kendra, you get a message that says, "Hi, Kendra, thanks for nominating your expertise or being an expert in this particular area. Dan has a question, and we believe that you may be able to help him. Please help and please collaborate with others." It says something like that. I wrote the language. It's something really nice. And right on the top. So it's a really nice message fidelity email that boom, busts right out to you. And so that's how we're more surgically and precisely, kind of the old getting the right knowledge to the right people at the right time. But there's no reason, because people these days, this is the purpose behind enforcing, or not enforcing, but constructing really effective knowledge processes or flows of knowledge behind the taxonomy and chasing that into expertise, capabilities, and competencies like I've been talking about, is that you want to have smarter flows of knowledge. You want to be able to get that knowledge to the people and not, participate in collaboration overload where people are getting like way too much information or stuff that's irrelevant to me, et cetera. So, and on the expertise side, this is very important and interesting, is that we open that up more softly, so to speak, that even if you have a little bit of expertise, we want you to nominate those areas of your expertise, because maybe it's an area where you're interested in or you want to learn more about. You're doing a little bit of it, or you will be in, the coming weeks or months of this work, and it's relevant. So we open it up to that also, because that learning part is so important, as well as the solving problems and having people that can do it effectively for you in the organization. But when you're doing that, you can't find the term you're looking for. This is the question you asked me. Right. It says it right there. It says, "Can't find the term you're looking for in the taxonomy? Please click right here and make a suggestion." So there's always going to be gaps. And I use the analogy of the English garden, that you're pulling weeds out and you're putting new flowers in, et cetera. So you want to open the doors to effective governance and effective processes to allow people to say, "Hey, we should put this topic in, or this subtopic underneath this topic," et cetera.
Great, thank you. That was very helpful. I have one more quick question before we move on to social network analysis, and that is, when you get the score of the clusters, do you have a particular cutoff point from those scores that you would include versus those you would exclude?
There is one, and I went over that with the people on the knowledge management team, and they actually wanted to expand it a little bit, and so I was looking at kind of 20 or 30 of the bigrams and trigrams, for example, and particular scores. But it's something that's really easy to do with effective software like this, and it's you can set the cutoff where you think's most appropriate, and then you can also, in conversations with people, you can show them terms that showed up but were kind of below the cutoff and are not being included right now, just so that they can say, "Hey, that's a term that's important, and we need to put that in there." And sometimes when I create a starter taxonomy, I create a set of what I call orphan terms also, where I can't really place them right now. And I put them in as orphan terms, and I need human corroboration to be able to tell me if they're valid and where they may go.
Great. That's really helpful. Great. Thanks. All right. So now we'll turn our attention to social network analysis, and you can take that away.
A lot of what we talked about so far has been, for me, it's all about people ultimately. But the beauty of being able to have such a rich set of data opens the doors for doing social network analysis as well, identifying things like brokers and those energy givers with can-do attitudes, sometimes I call them, and being able to connect those brokers more effectively. To avoid the different kind of on the right there, it shows some of the downside and the challenges associated with the interaction between workers and how much time is spent in an average week, et cetera. So you want to be able to connect people more effectively. Cohesion is degrees of separation. So can you get to one where I'm only in a big organization, 1 degree away from anybody and I can find that person immediately? Maybe not. But if you get to 2, that might be something, or something in between, or something close to 2. So that's what we're talking about there. So when I did the text analysis, I knew right away, because I had the data on the people and who was asking whom and how frequently, et cetera, that I could do social network analysis too for this particular community. And this is just a sociogram example to show how people were connected all over the world, et cetera. And I was able to really home in on those people that were building strong ties. And then I was able to talk to those people to be able to learn the behavioral ways in which they were building those strong ties and were becoming these key brokers. It's the brokers that you want to identify and you want to reward and recognize, around large global organizations. I'm a huge believer in that, because they're performing this role of connecting others and being, just a positive individual and helping others. And in this particular sociogram, you can see that one of the big challenges with this particular community is there's a large community, a lot of people in it, but they really had relatively few brokers, and that I sometimes refer to them as a blessing, because they're out there and they're helping so many people. They're really go-to people, but it also shows vulnerability in terms of retaining critical knowledge. People come and people go. Everyone's not going to be there forever. And when you develop so much dependency on certain individuals, then it just becomes a challenge in the context of being able to retain critical knowledge when that person walks out the door. And I've got something, another way that I kind of analyze this. And so in this case, I'm showing, look at this and how many people are kind of on the sidelines and they participate in the community, but they're kind of sitting on their hands a little bit in terms of responding to others. Mm-hmm. And really counting on certain individuals that are driving so much of the engagement and the activity and solving problems really effectively. And on the right, then I show the same graph when, let's say that 5% of your top brokers would walk out the door. But on the next one, I go to 10%. And you can see density in a sociogram like this, where you're showing all the connections of people, in this case, over a 4-year period of time, is the robustness. And you can just literally see that, this is a very hypothetical example. What if 10% of those people who are the most connected, but by the way, they are the people in an organization that are most attractive in terms of maybe being hired somewhere else. Right. So from a retention and succession planning standpoint, it's something you can keep your eye on. When you can show this visually and concretely, what if 10% of those people on a Friday left and didn't come back on Monday? That robustness in the graph you see on the right, it's like, holy smokes. Now, there's a term I like to use, serendipity or knowledge accidents. And now you're really relegating yourself to knowledge accidents, because you don't have these brokers driving this tremendous amount of problem solving activity, helping other people to be able to drive good results for customers around the world. So this was kind of a revelational thing for them when those people that are on the far right kind of walked out the door without the 10% of those knowledge brokers. And I looked at that I like to do, communities always have people that are extended or peripheral members. And I like to do an analysis of those folks and figure out, what are the things and the behavioral aspects from an organization-based or a community of practice-based or individually based standpoint. How can we kind of draw them in? Because they're there. They're not just lurking. They're there because they want to learn, but they can be there because they're busy at their other job. They might be in research and development, for example, or new product development. So which would generally mean they have deep expertise or are truly experts in certain areas. How can we work to draw them in? One of the examples is that one of the things I learned is that people didn't like the older community site and processes they had where people got immediate alerts, because you were bombarded and it was just too much stuff. And that's that information overload thing. So in the new community design with the based on taxonomy and expertise to be able to just push things to you that you're interested in or you can help in based on how you've independently clicked and analyzed the topics and subtopics that where you have expertise. You can imagine that that's uplifting for somebody. I'm going to have more time for that. I'm going to be more interested in that because
Mhm.
you want to play into the fact that collaboration has a lot to do with professional pride, the fact that people care and they want to help, but don't push them too far because when you start getting, spam or irrelevant things, then all of a sudden you might just say, you know what, I'm just going to turn my alerts off because it's just too much for me. So the solution is designed for them and the improvements and the transformation in their communities to be able to do this and to be able to help those peripheral members over there as you go through and et cetera. So to drive the degrees of separation, again, cohesion on the right here. And you want to be able to get those people more in the game because they're really viable community members, but they're really only interested in certain topics. The other thing that as you're looking at the there's a lot of people that are on the edges, just simply on the edges, and you want to understand what these weak ties, I call them sometimes, what the how you can drive their behavior to kind of change and how you can bring some people along if they could be more involved in a community, what would it take? What are they interested in, et cetera? And it plays into what I just talked about as well. So and then there's some orphan nodes over here that are kind of stuck out there, and it can
Yeah.
be effective to understand those people as well. In this case, I like to also look at who's willing to ask questions because it all starts with demonstrating human vulnerability and asking questions in a
Mhm.
lot of cases in a community where you're solving problems. So knowing who those people are and asking the questions is really just an important skill, and encouraging people, particularly across languages and cultures. It can be it can be something that's very, very difficult in terms of behavior. So one of the things we did with this particular community is they previously just had a community sponsor, and that individual had to kind of do everything. And so what we did was we dispersed the responsibility with a new community operating model and identified brokers based on this data that could become core team members. So this is really valuable because most knowledge is local, and encouraging people locally to be more engaged in the community, asking questions, et cetera. And the next way I look at things is who's asking the questions, so answering the questions rather, the repliers. So this is really important too. So understanding the people asking, how you can disperse the responsibility in community, maybe with the community structure, defining the roles and responsibilities of those people. Those are all elements to be able to drive broader engagement and more effective engagement, et cetera. So we're doing all these things, really a full on transformation of their communities. And these people need to be thanked. I mean, these people are clearly people that are driving this. In the case of, I got one final thing I want to show you. This tragically, this one individual who is like unbelievable in terms of solving things. He left the company. So
Oh, wow.
tragically from the company standpoint, but you can see that when you're counting too much on one or two or three brokers, and then that person leaves, then all of a sudden, like, who becomes those go-to people to be able to solve the problems? And
Right.
so this highlights retaining critical knowledge. And I talked about earlier that really the only effective way to do that is to do it in the course of how people work, in the flow of how people work. So um, that's a real high level, quick overview of the S&A work and how I combined that with the text analysis and the creation of taxonomy to fortify and transform their communities.
Did you use a different software for SNA or was it also in Orange?
No, I used Tulip. I'm sorry I didn't mention that. It's
Oh, that's
like
okay.
the flower, like
Yep.
the flower.
Got
And
it.
so it's also open source and really an effective way. Some idiosyncratic things there as well, but it worked well. So I like to grab open source stuff because it's a lot of people have contributed to it, and there's a lot of the crowdsourcing element makes it better and better is what I always believe. And there's no cost associated with it either in this case.
So what would you say in each of these projects was the biggest challenge that you had to face?
Well, the biggest challenges are definitely because we transform the communities so drastically, and I like to think effectively, is that just the training element of that and
Mhm.
getting the new structure of the communities, the dispersing the responsibilities to core team members, for example, and getting them to be effective in a train-the-trainer sense and making sure that they can, for their kind of local constituents where they work, that they're engaging them. And it's new, and anytime something's new and you're working in a global organization, it's going to be challenging from the human and behavioral aspects. And so, but once you start, the it starts paying off once people start realizing that, I'm getting better engagement because things are coming to me that I know about. And that's that whole matching identity opportunity that you have within a community. So our code in our community, which we use SharePoint Online, by the way, with some custom code. It's really super cool. And the technical team has done a fabulous job with this. And so that it makes that all makes that all possible. Um, it's funny, I don't hear a lot of other companies or organizations talking about this. I'm sure there maybe are that have it, but it makes a tremendous amount of sense,
So
to be able
you,
to push and precision based alerts.
so you're matching them up through using SharePoint?
Yeah, it's SharePoint based, but we match it up with the code that comes in. So when people tag something and what something is about, fully, it automatically generates a connection point with people that have said, "Yeah, I know about this and I'm willing to help."
Got it. That's great.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, what advice would you give to our students about doing text analysis and social network analysis?
Well, don't be afraid to dive in because you can learn really fast. If you get high quality content, I mean, that's really the critical first step to be able to analyze, and it just can be so uplifting to be able to do stuff really fast in terms of creating that first version or that starter taxonomy. Um, and there's so much information out there, whether it's the software packages that I mentioned, in combination with different learning opportunities through, for example, YouTube videos. So don't be afraid to jump in and try it out, and you'll find that you become really good at it in a short period of time, and you can make a lot of sense and bring things to the surface. Otherwise, things are mysterious and invisible behind it. You're kind of like, yeah, I know this is there, I know that's there, but when you can bring it forward and then tangibly show things, like I went on and on, I talked about the metrics, but that's all possible with really good content and really good data to be able to say, hey, this is where it hurts the most. This is what it's telling us. Let's corroborate this with people with expertise, for sure. But this is what we can go after to make a difference, and a measurable difference. Measuring is so hard, within communities, but it's possible. You can do it. And that's one of the key thoughts I want to leave you with today.
It's great. Dan, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. And these were really good. I like the way you linked the benefits from using both together with the taxonomy from the text analysis, as well as matching that up to the expertise. That was really a great stroke of brilliance. So thank
No,
you so
thank you
much
so
for
much.
sharing that with us. All
Well,
right.
thank you, Kendra. It's been, I always enjoy talking to you, and this was a good process. Thanks for leading it.
Thanks. Okay.